Morning Glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, and I am here to give you some advice. The debt limit discussion has begun. It is mind-numbing. It will absolutely make your eyes roll back in your head. I want to explain it to you. I want to explain it to you because last night the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, who had listened to my interview with Chip Roy, has said, what is going on here? And I said, most of America is going to end up asking what is going on here, especially when the New York Times and the Washington Post, but most recently the New York Times this morning, has a story out on the debt limit crisis. And yesterday I wrote a column on the debt limit crisis. And I talked to Chip Roy about the debt limit crisis last week. I'm going to talk to Dan Crenshaw and Mike Gallagher about the debt limit crisis, and Seung Kim about the debt limit crisis, and Olivia Beavers about the debt limit crisis today. There is no crisis. What there is the national credit card is maxed out. Now, the New York Times article provides the first opening item in Ellis News Items this morning over at Substack. So it's a great summary of the New York Times. Let me go to the Ellis item summary. With days to go before the United States bumps up against a technical limit on how much debt it can issue, Wall Street analysts and political prognosticators are warning that a perennial source of partisan brinksmanship could finally tip into outright catastrophe in 2023. Big investors and bank economists are using financial models to predict when the United States, which borrows money to pay its existing bills, will run out of cash. They are assessing what it could mean if the government is unable to pay some of its bondholders and the country defaults on its debt. And they are gaming out how both to minimize risk can make the most of any opportunities to profit that might be hiding in the chaos. The need to start planning for a potential debt limit breach became more urgent last week when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen told Congress that the United States would hit its borrowing cap on Thursday. At that point, Treasury will begin using extraordinary measures to try to stay under the cap for as long as possible, but those options could be exhausted as soon as June. All right, so we're not in a crisis. We have until June to figure out whether or not we're going to raise the national credit card limit. And that's all it is. And the people who raise it, the Congress and the president have to agree to raise it. Now, for your background, the national debt after World War II was less than $1 trillion. All right, that's just for starters. In 1999, actually, let's use year 2000, the end of the Clinton year, before 9/11, the national debt was $5.6 trillion, right? $5.6 trillion. At the end of the Bush years, the national debt had doubled to $10 trillion. That represents the war. At the end of the Obama years, it went from $10 trillion to $21 trillion. Right, so we went up another 10 trillion in 8 years. At the end of the Trump years, so it was 20 trillion. I mean, what year is that? 2016. At the end of 2016, it's 19.5 trillion. At the end of 2020, it's 27 trillion. So it went up 8 trillion under Trump. That's COVID. And then immediately it jumped up to 31 trillion in 2 years of Biden. So we've been on a spending spree that is bipartisan and is driven by three major events. It was about $6 trillion before 9/11. Then 9/11 happened, then 2008 fiscal crisis happened, and then COVID happened. And suddenly we're at 31 trillion. So we went from 5 trillion to 31 trillion. That's how much debt we increased in 20 years. That's, of course, the word is unsustainable, but it's crazy. We are living on borrowed time. So what to do? Chip Roy and I had a 25-minute chat about that. And I regret I mischaracterized what he said in my Washington Post column, because the last thing he said was, let's send over a CR that rolls back spending, non-defense discretionary spending, to FY19. Earlier in the program, he had said in the debt raise, let's roll back spending to 22 levels, including the Pentagon. I conflated those two and thought he wanted to roll defense back to 2019 levels. He doesn't. Chip Roy is a good hawk. He's not a 100% hawk like I am, which is defense comes first and then you figure out everything else. But he's close. And I regret the error. And I wrote my Washington Post editor, and Chip and I were talking yesterday. I said, sorry, I didn't have it right in front of me, but we talked about so many different numbers. To me, my confusion, and I follow this closely, illustrates the key necessity here. The Republicans have to articulate the problem, which is that borrowing in this country went from 6 trillion in the year 2000 at the end of the Clinton years to 31 trillion in 23 years. And that happened primarily because of entitlement growth, Obamacare, Social Security, Medicare. Yes, those are there, but also the costs associated with 9/11, the costs associated with the bailout of 2008 and the stimulus of 2009 TARP. And it also has to do with the COVID spending of the last 5 years. It's a bipartisan spending spree unmatched even by World War II. We just went crazy in the last 30 years. So now we have a problem and we have to address it. But the gun isn't cocked and loaded. We can't breach the debt limit. We don't want to even play chicken on it because that's the full faith and credit of the United States. And once you break your word, you become a deadbeat. And I'm sure you all know. Hey, Dwayne, have you got that $20? Never mind. You all know people who you gave money to and it never came back. If you ever did that, you know exactly who it is. You never forget. If you lent money to someone and you never got it back, you remember who it is. They're a deadbeat. And you are less inclined to lend it to them the next time, unless, of course, it's family, in which case it's just gifts. And and if you make a gift to someone, you don't expect it back. But if you're borrowing, you know that you might be caught in a debt spiral. And you get a new credit card and you max that out to pay your old credit card and you move the balances around. And debt spirals are terrible things. In fact, debt spirals, I got a brand new sponsor in this show. I wasn't intending to do this now, so I got to look up the name of the sponsor because it's tax season. And the number one reason that people don't file their taxes is because they don't have any money. And the number one reason they don't have any money is that they spend it all and then they max their credit cards out. Now they don't know what to do and they don't want to talk to the IRS. So if that's you and you didn't file last year and you don't have any money this year and you're screwed and they've begun getting nasty letters and they're going to attach your lien, they're going to garnish your wages and lien against your house and your business, go find Defense Tax Partners right away. They're very good at this. DefenseTax.com, DefenseTax.com, or you can call them at 877-933-9411. The Congress really ought to call Defense Tax Partners, or maybe Speaker McCarthy and Leader McConnell ought to go to DefenseTax.com and say, what do we do about this? But the bottom line, people get into debt crises. Countries get into debt crises. When they happen to anybody not named the United States, they destroy the economy. I was in Greece after a debt crisis, and everybody's pension got cut 25%. Some people's pension got cut 40%. Every old person in Greece had gone back to work. And sovereign debt crises are very bad things. And the United States owes people who have borrowed money from it, bondholders, $31 trillion. And we're going to have to borrow a lot more, and we're going to keep borrowing for many, many years. But you don't want to just raise the debt limit and let it go forward. You're like the person who's had a problem with the IRS. Don't try and just forget about it and ignore it, because the IRS will come and find you, and the United States, the markets will come and find you. So if you're an individual in tax problem, you call Defense Tax Partners, or you go to DefenseTax.com. And if you're a sovereign nation, you got a plan together about what to do. And it can't be a dummy plan. It can't cut defense either. And Chip Roy's a defense hawk, and I apologize for conflating his backstop, which is a CR that maintains defense spending, I think, at FY22 and a rollback to FY19. But he would just rather do a debt limit reset of the budget to FY22. We're in FY23, by the way. Hugh Hewitt's version is roll everything back except defense and increase that by at least 5%. But it doesn't matter so much what Chip Roy, who's a good, responsible congressman, or me, or Dan Crenshaw, or Mike Gallagher think. I'll ask them all. What matters is that the Republicans lock and load. They figure out what they've got to have, and they communicate that again and again and again. And they do so the New York Times cannot say that the Republicans are threatening the sovereign debt of the United States and our credit rating in a crisis. No, we're not. Republicans are asking for specific measures attached to a debt limit ceiling increase. They have to say what those specific measures are. They can't, or if they say too many things, they end up doing to the Republicans what I did to Chip Roy, conflate them all and get it wrong. I regret that error. The media won't regret that. They're not making errors at all. They're going to make the Republicans look like the bad guys. So here's the key. Get it together, Speaker McCarthy and Leader McConnell. Hammer it out, make your demand, make it often, early, and repeat it. I'll be doing that throughout the day. That was my debt limit explanation combined with an apology to Chip Roy. Good guy. Called me up yesterday. Didn't blow fire and smoke. Just said, I said this and I said that, and you mixed it up, and that's fine. I got it straight now. But nevertheless, Republicans have got to get it straight now, not just Chip Roy and Hugh Hewitt. We got to get the message down. Stay tuned, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I know you're walking along a street somewhere if you're out getting your morning exercise. Glad to have you with me. Glad you're listening either to the radio show or to the Highly Concentrated Hugh podcast. The biggest news story overnight. It was revealed in GarageGate that the Department of Justice and the FBI considered but rejected a role in searching for Joe Biden's documents. I'm shocked that the FBI didn't want to go to Joe Biden's house with a warrant. Just amazed here. The Justice Department considered having FBI agents monitor a search by President Biden's lawyer for classified documents at his homes, but decided against it, both to avoid complicating later stages of the investigation and because Mr. Biden's attorneys had quickly turned over a first batch and were cooperating, according to people familiar with the matter. Now, do you think anybody else in the world gets that? Oh, I've given you everything you need. We found some more, but don't worry, there's nothing else there. Third batch of documents. We're going to keep looking. And the FBI does not normally say to the mafioso or to the crime boss or to the terrorist or to the embezzler or to Sam Bankman-Fried, okay, you take it from there and get back to us. Normally, they do the searching. And apparently, they were invited to, but they didn't want to get involved. That's not exactly what happened with Donald Trump. The former president was on the Water Cooler podcast with David Brody and spoke to GarageGate. Cut number 1.
Well, I don't want to get into that, but obviously it's a cover-up. It's a very sad situation. He was coming to me. We have a much different situation. I was president. I have the right to declassify as president. As a vice president, as you know, can't do that. And many other things. I'm under the Presidential Records Act, which is for presidents, and he's under a very tough constraint. He's under the Federal Records Act, which is a much tougher situation. We have literally a fortress here. You could say it's an armed fortress. And Mar-a-Lago was built as the Southern White House by Marjorie Meriwether Post and E.F. Hutton, her husband at the time, E.F. Hutton, and immensely wealthy. They built it really give to the country, and they did actually, and it was turned back because they felt it was too expensive for the country, which is interesting. But it was built as an armed fortress, and we were locked, and we were ready, and we had Secret Service, and we also had our security, but we had Secret Service there at all times. So, it's a much different situation. Now I see that they have their classified documents sitting on the floor in a big pile in a garage someplace. And it's a big problem, I think, for them. I don't know. It would be nice if all the investigations could stop because we're like investigation central in this country. Right. No country in the world has anything like this. You want to make America great again. And this nonsense is just, it never ends. But it's a problem. There's no question about it. He's got, and now they're saying there are many other places that he stored documents. And it brings Obama into the picture, as you can imagine, because the documents are really Obama documents. It's from the Obama administration. And now I guess they're getting him involved. How come he allowed that to happen?
So the former president realizes these are not being treated the same way. He got a raid. The FBI says, no, thank you. We don't want to go to your homes with the current president. They don't want to search their boss. They don't mind harassing the former president. Cut number 2, James Comer, new chair of the House Oversight Committee on Fox with Martha McCollum. Here's Congressman Comer.
Well, we're very interested in who all is through the Biden Center for Diplomacy. We know that that's primarily funded through anonymous donations from China. But what amazes me is what the White House said about the fact that they didn't keep records of who went to and from the president's personal residence because that was personal. But yet the Democrats released Donald Trump's personal tax returns for years prior to him even being president. So that was public record. This White House has been so inconsistent and so hypocritical from day one in all their investigations with respect to Trump, now with the same types of concerns with Joe Biden. Look, we're going to continue to press for answers. We believe that this family could be compromised because of the millions of dollars that they've received from our adversaries around the world, particularly from China, and the fact that they possess these documents in multiple locations all over town is very concerning.
All right, now let's go here. Dan Crenshaw, Congressman Crenshaw will be joining me in the third hour of today's program. Here's Congressman Crenshaw talking about GarageGate, cut number 3.
The Democrats and Joe Biden set the rules on how we're supposed to react to something like this based on Trump's documents that were in his residence. And so we have to play by those rules. And according to those rules, we all have to freak out, and then the FBI has to raid the home. That's the rules. Okay, now, do I think those should be the rules? No, I don't think those should be the rules. I do not think Trump's residence should have ever been raided for this. I think there should be some benefit of the doubt. I think there should be some grace given to ex-presidents or ex-vice presidents who leave office and it's crazy and it's chaotic and people are packing stuff up and they're not really sure where it went. That happens. I get it. That can be a mistake. But I didn't make the rules now. The rules now say that the FBI has to raid the home and do a thorough search, not your personal lawyers going through the garage and according to what we know, stopping the search after they find one document and going through whatever legal process they need to inform the archives. That's what they're doing. But they also didn't tell anybody. The only reason they even told anybody about this was because it was reported by the media. And see, what frustrates me too is this actually happened, not in his residence, but in the UPenn office in D.C. It happened before the election. So this was something that voters would like to know, especially because Donald Trump's home was just raided by the FBI. Yep. All right, that's what makes it relevant. Otherwise, we could have some grace on this, right? We could say, look, mistakes happen, benefit of the doubt. Let's make sure the process is now transparent from here going forward. But this has been 6 years in his garage. He's probably had a lot of people come over there, whether it's workers, whether it's staff, whether it's friends, like who knows? And they say they're being transparent, but they're really not.
Now, Jim Jordan, who's chairman of House Judiciary Committee, also spoke to the double standard, cut number 4.
Yeah, I mean, this is not about politicizing anything. This is about the double standard that I think is so evident to the American people. There were one set of rules for Secretary Clinton, one set of rules for Joe Biden, a different set for President Trump, and anyone with common sense can see that as well. So I point to this. I still remember when I questioned Secretary Clinton in the Benghazi hearings about her 60-some thousand emails. I asked her a very simple question. Madam Secretary, why don't we don't want to see the personal emails. This is America. You have privacy rights. We get that. But we don't exactly trust you and your lawyers to turn over to the committee what the American people are entitled to see. How about this idea? We let a neutral third party, like a retired federal judge, examine those emails, and then they'll decide. No, she couldn't do that. Her and her lawyers had to decide. And of course, we know she destroyed 30,000 of those 60-some thousand emails. Why did they get to operate that way versus how President Trump was treated? So we just want the equal application of the law, for goodness sake. And frankly, we'd also like some transparency. We were just talking about this in the debt ceiling debate. But remember what happened here. In November, they find classified documents at the Biden Center. In December, they find him in his home in the garage. We learn about it January 9th, but we only learn, the White House only tells us about the ones at the Biden Center. Why didn't they tell us about the ones at his garage when they knew it at the time? So just be transparent with the American people and treat everyone the same. That's all we're asking for in this situation.
And, of course, they're not going to get it. And Michael Waltz, congressman from Florida, on CNN with Allison Camerata, cut number 11.
An FBI raid, isn't that a little premature? I mean, the FBI didn't go in to execute that search warrant with President Trump until 16 months. They've been waiting for him to turn over the documents. It's only been 2 months for Biden so far. So why would you want the FBI to go in?
Well, your math is interesting there, Allison, because by my math, it's been 5 years that these documents have been sitting there. And so if, the White House's rendition of kind of events here is correct, that we've done the right thing, we've told the National Archives, we've told the Department of Justice, why didn't they tell and do the right thing 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and then once
they say they just, I hear you, but they say they just discovered it.
Well, so that's my other question, on top of the list that you guys have rightly asked is why were $1,000 an hour high-priced attorneys suddenly on November 3rd starting to look through these documents? And since then, the University of Pennsylvania said we didn't ask them to clear out that office. So what drove that look and then disclosure in the first place. Let's add that to the whole list of questions. But I think what we need in the most immediate term, which we asked about the previous president as well in the Mar-a-Lago documents, is what was exposed. What were the nature of them? A lot has been made of this was only 20 versus 300, but it only takes one. This is about the quality and the sensitivity of the documents, not just the quantity. And we have yet to get any answers. That's why we're going to have to investigate.
That's the perfect answer. There are a lot of questions, including the precipitating event. I'm going to ask Representative Gallagher and Representative Crenshaw, do they think this was in response to the grand jury that is sitting on Hunter Biden? Also want to play for you Leader McConnell, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, longest serving leader of either party in the Senate, in the history of the Senate, which is saying something as of January, was on WHAS radio yesterday with Terry Miners, and he had this to say first on James Comer, his fellow Kentuckian, who will be leading into some of these investigations as chairman of House Oversight, cut number 15.
The way I look at this coming Congress is the worst won't happen. As a result of the House flipping, the Democrats will no longer be able to pass through a process called reconciliation where they can do it with only their votes. Won't be proud of Jimmy Comer. You may not know this, but on his wall in his Washington office is a picture of the two of us when he was head of the FAA. It came in they had a visit to Washington. And
the future farmers?
FAA, yeah.
FFA.
He was, when he was a kid, he was head of the state FAA.
I'll be
They had a trip to Washington. He has a picture up on his wall of the two of us. So Jamie's a really smart guy, and I think he'll handle this oversight job responsibly.
You see, Leader McConnell, one of the reasons you get to be leader is that you know everyone and you've been greeting people in your office forever, and you actually get to do that kind of stuff. One more quick one. Leader McConnell is very optimistic on the McCarthy speakership, cut number 13. He didn't like the fight, though.
Well, because Kevin didn't know that he had the votes. And so apparently the way the House works, until you elect a speaker, you can't do anything. So they couldn't hand out committees. They couldn't do anything. And so a small group in the House decided to use that as leverage to get commitments of one kind or another, all of which I'm not certain of. And hopefully McCarthy was not so weakened by all this that he can't be an effective speaker. I'm pulling for him. I think he was the right guy for the job. And I'm hoping it's going to settle down and work out well.
I think it's going to settle down and work out well. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming right back on the Hugh Hewitt. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Good morning, Congressman. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. Good to be with you.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking you for the role you played in the speaker controversy, because you brought urgency to the television screen and underscored that there were major things at stake. So thank you. I want to begin by asking you to do a look back. A friend of mine named Brian Ferguson, and you may know Brian from the teams. I don't know if you ever deployed together, but you may know Brian. He gave a speech once where he talked about how the SEALs would do something called a hot wash after a mission, where in reverse order of seniority, they would review what had happened, what went right, what went wrong, ending with the commander of the mission. So in congressional terms, would you do a hot wash for us as to what screwed up there? Because if the mission is getting to yes and getting a majority, that was not the way to do it the next time.
Well, how much time do you have?
We got lots of time.
It's a great question. I mean, I'll just give you my assessment of what happened. I mean, there's this. I think there's certain members that legitimately just had a personal dislike for McCarthy, and that's okay. You're allowed to have that, but what I would have liked to have seen, if this movement was going to happen, what I would have liked to have seen is simply someone else running against him. I mean, in a real way, not just throwing the name in the hat at the last minute, or nominating a different member of Congress or even a non-member of Congress every time they nominated someone. But I mean, really run against them, for a year or say, like go around, raise money, ask for votes, those kind of things. That would have been a different tone, I think. But that's not what happened at all. And they're just, I think one of the reasons there became so much animosity throughout that week was because it didn't seem like there was a plan. It didn't seem like there was an alternative reality that they wanted to live in. There's all this talk about the rules package, and you see all these memes going out from a lot of the kind of the right wing Twitter world saying you got to thank the 20 patriots for this historic rules package. Well, no, you don't. That's a false narrative. Like I do honestly believe we can move forward and that we can all be friends now, and that it is good to kind of have these fights out. But I will not let this narrative stand that they won this rules package. That's a lie. The rules package was already agreed to. Nothing changed from the first vote to the 17th vote or whatever we took. Nothing changed. It's also worth noting that we could have just, if it was really about negotiating these rules, we easily just could have adjourned on the first day, gone behind closed doors until we hashed it out. We didn't have to do this in public. Didn't have to have all these ridiculous nominating speeches. Didn't have to nominate different members of Congress or Donald Trump like every single time. It was obvious that they wanted a show, and that was really frustrating. I don't only say that I'm not trying to create more fights here. I just don't want the false narrative to become reality. That's all. That's the reason. I also want to explain to people why the anger got so heated. It wasn't like the 200 who were voting for McCarthy were just McCarthy's best friend and were really mad that they were saying mean things about him. That's really not what it was. It was that we didn't know what the other side wanted, and when we would ask them, we would personally ask many members, and they wouldn't be able to tell us. There was a really defining moment before we even took the first vote where in front of everyone, in front of the conference, McCarthy asked one of the leaders of this group, what else can we give you? Like, what else do you guys want to get to yes? And he couldn't answer it. And that was a really bad moment for the conference, because then it really seemed like we would never get that answer.
Now,
there was some other kind of intent here.
I've got to ask, because we are going to run soon into the debt limit crisis followed by the funding crisis. There are two inflection points ahead. One will come in June, one will come in September. In June, the debt limit's got to go up. I don't know what the Republicans are going to ask in exchange. In 2011, they got sequestration, which are terrible for Department of Defense. Chip Roy and I talked about that at length. Chip's position as of last week is a rollback to 2022 spending, or as an alternative, a rollback to FY19 and non-defense discretionary spending. I misstated that in the Washington Post article I wrote, and I regret that. I want to get people right. But mostly I want to know, what process does Dan Crenshaw think the Republicans ought to follow to get a list of demands in exchange for a debt limit hike, which is inevitable, so that they don't lose the showdown with the Democrats via the media?
Yeah, and I don't exactly know what the map looks like. I do agree with most Republicans that there should be some kind of concessions in place if you're going to raise the debt. It is in and of itself a national security crisis to have a runaway debt, and we spent a lot of money in the last few years. Our mandatory spending is going to drive our country into a pretty unsustainable debt trajectory. So getting some kind of hold on that, if we're going to raise the debt limit, is not an absurd request to make. How that looks, I'm not sure yet. Right? It's a few months away. We have to get something, and we just have to be careful about what we ask for. I mean, you can obviously ask for too much, and there's going to be differences of opinion on what's possible and what's not. And there's a certain wing of the party who always thinks that we could have done better. Who always thinks that we could die on every single hill and do better. And there's others who say that's just completely unrealistic. And that perception of reality is really what the fight is about, right? It's really not about who's more conservative or less conservative. It's really about who interprets reality differently, and who interprets the political reality differently than others. And we're going to have to just find that sweet spot and make sure that we don't actually default on our debt, while also making sure that we put our debt on a sustainable trajectory.
And the political reality, if the mission set is to get a win in the course of raising the credit card limit again, and it's gone from $6 trillion at the end of the Clinton presidency to $31 trillion in the middle of the Biden presidency. That's wild. People ought to step back and say, what? And that we went from $6 trillion when George W. Bush went into office, and we're at 31 trillion now. And the big three events are 9/11, 2008, and COVID. That's the explanation, bipartisan spending. But now we have to do something. But what we get out of that, the Republicans will get crushed, and they will interfere with the 2024 presidential campaign and the debates among Republicans that will begin in July if they don't get to a coherent set of asks. And do you think that last week foreshadows the next couple of months? Because if it does, it's a nightmare for Republicans.
I would say it was probably good to get a lot of those demons out early. I'm not trying to just find some ridiculous silver lining to all of this, but I would have rather gotten those demons out early than do it when you've got a debt crisis on your hands. And so I know McCarthy said that in public a few times, and people say, "Oh no, you're just trying to paint this pig with lipstick." But I actually do agree with him. You learn a lot about your colleagues. It's good to yell at each other sometimes and then apologize afterwards. There's actually a lot of growth that comes with that, and a little bit more trust that occurs there. So, look, there are going to be differences. This is going to be difficult times with the budget and the debt ceiling. Those are going to be difficult times, but I do think we'll get through them. I'm a little bit more optimistic than most.
Now, Congressman, what I'm urging, I had Chairman Gallagher on earlier, and Mike agrees. I think you agree. We cannot reduce defense spending a dime. It actually needs an increase, a fairly significant increase year over year over the 2023 continuing resolution, because we have a South China Sea problem, we have a resupply problem, we've got a Columbia-class nuclear submarine problem. Do you think the vast majority of Republicans agree that defense spending cannot go down?
I do. I mean, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the disagreements when it comes to national defense are over hot topics like Ukraine and such. And look, there's also massive agreement that we need the Defense Department to do a lot more with the dollars that we give them. I mean, and this is in the armed services lane. I'm not even on that committee, but everybody who's even come in contact with the military knows how much wasteful spending goes on. It's not this fraudulent wasteful spending. It's just a poor bureaucratic procedure in how they do contracting and how they do acquisitions. And so you have to do both, right? You have to make sure that we're investing the right dollars in the right places so that we can compete with China in the long run. You do have to rebuild our industrial complex to actually meet those demands. Like, there's this myth out there that we always just want to increase spending and have these endless wars to support the military industrial complex and our donors. You hear that from, say, Tucker Carlson and such. The problem is exactly the opposite. The problem, and we're seeing it now as we try to deliver weapons to Taiwan, deliver weapons to Ukraine, is that we don't even really have a military industrial complex the way we thought we did. That's the real problem. There's a lot of complicated reasons for that, but yes, I think most Republicans generally understand this idea. There's disputes on exactly what we do with it, but I think we'll as Republicans as a whole, we will be fighting to at least maintain defense spending or increase it.
Now, on that point, I think the Chief of Naval Operations said last week, even if the Congress wanted us to build more submarines this year, we couldn't. We can build 1.2 submarines a year. That's a bad situation, because we're never going to help AUKUS stand up and get the Australians nuclear subs if we can't build our own. Congressman Crenshaw, which committees are you on? Did you end up on the Select Committee on China, or on the Weaponization Committee, or on HASP? Where are you?
Well, I'm on Energy and Commerce. That's been my committee. So I deal with energy issues and healthcare issues. That's I'm from Houston, after all. When it comes to national security issues, I try to influence from the outside.
Have you put a bid in for the China Committee?
I haven't, as much as I like hanging out with our mutual friend Mike Gallagher, but maybe I will. We haven't gotten to that point yet as we're placing members on different committees.
Yeah, I want serious people on that. There are only going to be 9 Republicans. I'm hoping the Democrats come up with 7 serious people, because I'm going to be talking with Mike Pompeo about his new book, Briefly, Never Give an Inch. And it's all about China, basically. It's not all about China, but a lot of it is about China. And that challenge is out there. And how significant, Dan Crenshaw, do you think that challenge is? I keep saying it's 1938, it's 1938, it's 1938. People think I'm nuts, but I think it's 1938. What do you think?
Well, it's different but similar. Yeah, I mean it's a longer term challenge that I do think there's challenges the Chinese are going to face that are going to benefit us. I think it's different than 1938 only in the sense that 1938 seemed to be only about military warfare. This kind of warfare is quite different. It's information warfare, it's economic warfare, diplomatic warfare, and of course potentially military warfare. It's our primary adversary for sure. It's our primary concern. That's why we've actually stood up this committee, and it was a bipartisan vote. Very few people voted against standing up this select committee. So there's a lot of good news to be had here. I think there's an understanding that the Chinese have hoodwinked us for years. Right, this belief that they were going to grow up into this wonderful democracy and contribute to the world economic health and all of that. It's all just nonsense. And they have a very strange and historic belief that the U.S. has been trying to trick them for decades. And it's time we understood that. And you're seeing, I think, a decoupling on the private sector in a large way. Without Congress doing anything, the private sector has been diversifying their supply chains and making sure that they're not solely reliant on China. There's a lot of good news to be had here. I've had many of the departments, many of the different branches of the Department of Defense come in and tell us, like, what exactly are you doing to plan for this? What kind of weapon systems? How are you restructuring your force? And I tend to like what I hear. It also tends to be obvious that they're about 5 to 10 years behind. We definitely started thinking about this a little too late, but they're definitely thinking about it. And from my tactical perspective, they're thinking about it in the correct ways. But it just reiterates this point. You can't cut spending now. You can't get those investments now. You have to let the Chinese know we're serious. We have to arm Taiwan to the teeth with the right kind of weapons that make an invasion of Taiwan an untenable option for the Chinese. It must be so costly that they can't even consider it. Our goal has to be 100% prevention, because you do not want to be in a war across an ocean over Taiwan. You just don't want to be in that situation. Our goal has to be prevention, and we've got to move a lot faster on that front.
So, Dan Crenshaw, you're a Navy guy, and so you're going to have some bias baked into your answer. But I think there has to be, in the context of the switch to the China competition, a lot of budget changes at the Pentagon that de-emphasize big Army and go to the Navy, Space Force, and the Air Force. That's just the map. The map is now mostly water for us, not desert. Do you agree with that? And do you think you're going to get some agreement from your Army friends like Mike Waltz and others who served in the big Army situation?
I mean, I'm sure the Army can find something to spend money on, but I do think there's agreement there for sure. The Pacific really is a maritime domain. The Marine Corps plays a huge part in this as well. So yeah, I would agree with that, and the investments in the Space Force are going to be extremely important as well, and investing in future weapon systems that operate in space, that also counter what the Chinese have in space. It's going to be a very important domain.
Now that leads me to the last subject. I believe you have introduced an authorization for the use of military force against the cartels. I know Mike Waltz supports this as well. I hope more Republicans step up and join that. What did you propose, Congressman Crenshaw?
Yeah, no, I definitely think more Republicans will come out and support that. My real hope is that I can get some Democrats to come out and support that. So it's an authorized use of military force. This is the same kind of AUMF that we have against, say, the perpetrators of 9/11. Okay, it authorizes the president to use military force against the I just dropped the plate against a select entity. In this case, we define those entities very specifically as anyone associated with these specific 9 cartels. You're thinking of like the Sinaloa cartels such as those. But we also broaden it slightly to anyone who is facilitating the trafficking of fentanyl. So this is really directed at the fentanyl problem, because what we see here is a war against the American people, where 80,000 people a year are dying of fentanyl overdose. I don't see that as a drug problem. I don't see that as the classic war on drugs. I see this as a poisoning problem, where people are being poisoned by fentanyl. It's coming from this, of course, interlinks with the China problem. The Chinese organized crime syndicates, they give the basic components to the Mexican drug cartels. They reprocess it. They get it across our border. So they're at war with us. I mean, you see reports of Sinaloa cartels just literally within eye shot of our border, armed to the teeth, kind of in these sort of forward operating bases. They're at war with us, and I think we should recognize it. Now, what I really think, too, is if we had a bipartisan AUMF that passed out of Congress, the president can do whatever he wants with an AUMF. He can just not do anything with it. But you know what it gives him? Leverage. It gives him leverage when we're trying to deal with Mexico on the immigration crisis, on the fentanyl crisis, on all of it. Mexico itself, as a country, can solve a lot of these problems if we simply ask them to. Now, if we ask them to, they won't do it. But if we leverage them, they might do it. And this is what Donald Trump did to get the Remain in Mexico policy. He simply threatened them with tariffs. So they can be leveraged. They can be worked with, but they need to know that we're serious about protecting our own homeland, and that's where the idea of this AUMF comes from.
I want to follow up on that. Governor Youngkin has said on this program last week, they've begun a new program in Virginia, One Pill Can Kill, because the poisoning aspect, as opposed to the drug use aspect, is different. And there was a story in the New York Times about heroin users dying because they're getting fentanyl in their heroin. They know how to normally, they're drug abusers. Yeah. We can work on that, but it's a different problem. It is a poisoning problem. Do Democrats agree with you, Congressman Crenshaw?
They agree with the statement you just made. It's hard to tell how far they will go to actually deal with the problem. Right? Their mind goes a different place. Their mind goes to, well, we got to treat people better. We got all that kind of stuff and better treatment facilities. And I'm like, no, man, you got to do that, but you got to go to the source of the poison. At the state level, what they've been successful as is reclassifying fentanyl as a poison, so that the penalty for trafficking it is much, much harsher. It's murder at that point. Not just drug trafficking. You're now accused of murder. That's exactly what should be happening. So you have to make sure that we're disincentivizing them and these middlemen drug dealers. But you have to go after the real problem. I mean, these are warlike figures and groups just south of our border. They're probably the most well-armed, most well-equipped, best-financed terrorist organizations in the entire world. And you have to deal with them as such. Enough is enough.
This is, by the way, this is a gap in the American public's perception. They've watched too many Netflix series. They've watched Breaking Bad, and they think it's a group of about 30 people who put you in the basement and cut off the heads of their local people. They're actually a paramilitary organization that has a command structure. Many of them have trained in Special Forces of Mexico. Do you think that Mexico is a failed state, Dan Crenshaw?
Well, it's right on the verge. It's right on the verge of being a failed narco-terrorist state. I mean, there was literally a war. It's probably still ongoing in the state of Sinaloa right now because the Mexican president finally ordered the arrest of El Chapo's son. And the retaliation was extreme. This was a war. These people are able to fight the Mexican army. So, yes, it's like you said, this is a paramilitary force, one of the best in the world. And they can fend off literal attacks from an entire nation-state's army.
So a last question. You've got some support for this AUMF. I know Walt supports it. Other people support it. Do you have any indication that the Mexican government would resist it? Because I assume it would only take place with notice at the last minute. The way we deal with the Pakistanis when you would go in and get an Al-Qaeda or Taliban people, sometimes you tell them, sometimes you don't. But they know our drones are there. Does your AUMF contemplate consultation with the Mexican government?
It would, of course, need to. And how would they react? Well, they would react very unfavorably, as you can imagine. But this is the problem. So, you can do two case studies here, Colombia and Mexico. Now, the Colombians let America in. Right? We had a very good relationship with Colombia over the course of a few decades with Colombia. And we eventually achieved our goals to a massive extent and prevented Colombia from becoming this awful failed state. Look, I have some very close relationships with Colombia. I actually went to high school there because my dad was in the oil business, and we lived down there at the time, at the height of the guerrilla war. There's a pretty massive difference in Colombia between now and 20 years from ago when I lived there. Mexico has often and always resisted American involvement, and to their own detriment. Right? They resist our intelligence sharing. They resist doing joint operations. They resist all of it. And because they've done that, they've gone down this path where they've basically just, instead of working with us to fight the cartels, they've basically gone into this a policy of appeasement and containment with the cartels. But it's not going to work forever because the cartels like making money, and they're going to continue to try to do things that make them money and power. And we have to say enough is enough. And I think the fentanyl crisis is that time.
I hope you are right. Congressman Dan Crenshaw, again, thanks for the stand you took a couple of weeks ago. Thanks for joining me today. Keep coming back, and I hope you end up on that China committee, even if you're already busy. Congressman, thank you. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt with Chairman Gallagher. Mike Gallagher, Congressman from Wisconsin, is chairman of the House Select Committee on China. He joins me now. Good morning, Chairman Gallagher. How are you?
It is great to be with you, Hugh.
It's wonderful. Ever since you became a chairman, you're putting on a sport coat and you're looking much better.
I got my workout done earlier today. I couldn't sleep last night. My daughter was up. So I showered for you. I shaved. I put on a sport coat. I mean, this is what I do to pay respect to the great Hugh Hewitt.
Let's not waste the time then. Later today, I'm going to pre-tape an interview with this man, Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, about this book, Never Give an Inch, which is 20% about the Chinese Communist Party. And it's direct. I mean, they do not like Mike Pompeo, and Mike Pompeo does not like the Chinese Communist Party. I am curious if you think he'll be among the witnesses called before or requested before the Select Committee on China.
I would love to have Secretary Pompeo testify for a few reasons. One, he was not only present at the effectuation of the biggest shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, but he was largely responsible for it. Him, Matt Pottinger, H.R. McMaster played a key role in changing the direction of our country in terms of our competition with China. And what's most remarkable about that shift is that it's largely a bipartisan one. In other words, while Democrats may quibble with certain aspects of the Trump administration shift on U.S. foreign policy, they haven't rejected it wholesale, which tells you something about the wisdom of that shift. The second reason is that, who has the perspective of being both Secretary of State and CIA director, to say nothing of his extensive background in Congress and the military, et cetera, et cetera. So one, I look forward to reading the book. Two, I'd love to have the secretary participate either in a hearing or a briefing to the members. And I think his perspective would be invaluable. And I've had conversations with him in a closed setting, and I've come away very enriched by those conversations.
Let's talk about the members. Has Hakeem Jeffries named your counterpart, the ranking minority member of the Select Committee on China yet?
He has not. I am hoping that whoever he names is someone serious, someone who doesn't want to play political games, and someone that's ready to get to work right away. I'm hoping that we have our Republican members named today or tomorrow, because that's standing in the way of me doing certain things. But again, as I said on your show multiple times since being named chairman, we want this to be a bipartisan effort. So I don't intend to go off and just do things by myself. I'd love to have a ranking member that can be there as we get certain things in place, as we do our first hearing. And so right now we're kind of in a holding pattern until we have that. And any prospective ranking members that might be considering running for the Senate, I just asked them to consider how much more fun it would be to work with me on the most important national security issue of our day than napping and getting the early bird special in the Senate.
Yeah, I'm telling you right now, the Gallagher Committee is going to matter a great deal. Let me talk to you a little bit about a non-Gallagher Committee issue, since we don't have the members yet, and that is the debt limit. Your friend and mine, Chip Roy, was on last week, and I wrote a column about it in the Washington Post, and I got it wrong. I said he wanted to roll back to FY19. He doesn't want to roll back to FY19. He wanted to roll back to FY22. If we do a CR rolling back to FY19, he wants to exempt defense spending. My point of view, which I'm trying to communicate, I don't want to ever get Chip Roy wrong because a good man engages, is that we can't cut defense spending, period. No matter what happens in the debt limit, no matter what happens in the CR and in the budget, we need a year-over-year real defense increase. Chairman Gallagher, do you agree with that? Because primarily of the threat posed by China.
I do. Well, quickly on Chip Roy, I do think Chip and I have a great relationship. I have enormous respect for his intellect. He's sincere. If you disagree with his tactics, there's no question that he's doing it for sound constitutional reasons. It's not grandstanding when it comes to Chip. And I having discussed this issue with him many times, I think we could get to a point where as long as we are aggressive on the cuts to non-defense discretionary, we could preserve enough space to not only stay at $858 billion for defense, but increase that by at least 3%. Now, we may be able to set up a process akin to something like Secretary Gates tried to set up before Obama betrayed him, where any savings in terms of administrative or bureaucratic redundancies, the service is fine. They could invest in hard power. But I completely agree with your point, Hugh, that now is not the time to be cutting defense. So then what is our ask? What is our negotiating position going into the debt ceiling crisis in particular? Well, someone who's never voted for a debt ceiling increase, I would think there are some sensible things we could demand and persuade some senators to come along. I have a bill called the Trust Act. Senator Romney has it in the Senate that would basically set up a series of rescue task forces for all the trust funds that are going insolvent, highway trust funds, Social Security, et cetera, learning the right lessons from the failure of Simpson Bowles. The REINS Act seems sensible to me. That's got a ton of support in the House. Ron Johnson has a bill called the Reducing the Size of the Federal Government Through Attrition Act. The Simpson Bowles Commission actually endorsed that bill. In fact, I bet there's a lot of things you can find in Simpson Bowles that Republicans would be enthusiastic about and aren't crazy proposals. So I think we can pair a debt ceiling increase with some sensible asks that would be very hard for Democrats in the Senate in particular to vote against.
Your friend and former holder of the chair that you hold, the David Dreyer Weekly Chair from Congress, Tom Cotton, suggested that debt limit amendments, when they raise, have to do with reducing the debt. So my ask is to repeal the 87,000 agents because we should not be balancing the debt on the back of small businesses. My other ask, just to send a message, NPR and PBS funding goes away, because that's the least defensible part of the federal government budget. It's not much, but it is the least defensible part. But then primarily that whatever you get to soon. Is there a process set up where the House conference is going to come to a conclusion on the asks and the Senate conference, GOP conference, is going to come to a conclusion on the ask and that be negotiated? Because right now we're losing the media battle. We're losing it.
Well, first of all, I agree on NPR and the IRS agents. The problem is that doesn't sort of really put a dent in your long-term debt issue. But in terms of a win that the grassroots can be excited about, as well as just the right thing to do, I agree with that. Here's the good news in terms of the overall process. We have a new budget chair, Jody Arrington. He's phenomenal. He's been leading these kind of off-the-record discussions about the debt issue, not just sort of the scale and scope of the debt, but the dysfunctional process that leads to these debt crises. He has a bill to actually fix that. He's a great guy. He came in with me in my class, and he's going to come forward with a set of proposals. And I'm very excited about his leadership on the budget committee. And he's someone who would be great to have on your show to talk about his vision for this. So I'm confident that the process behind the scenes between him and the Speaker's office is moving forward. This is not going to be easy. These debt negotiations never are in divided government. But I think we can just stand firm on a series of sensible, adult in the room asks as we go forward, and then we can start to win that media battle.
Well, Jody Arrington is smart. Chip Roy is smart. You're smart. Speaker McCarthy's smart. Everybody's got a lot of good ideas, but it's got to come down to a lead paragraph in a column. It really cannot be longer than 3 sentences. Until the border wall goes up, neither will the debt limit. That whatever it is, there's got to be an is that the American people understand. Today's New York Times story says debt crisis, Republicans are going to cause insolvency. You're going to get hammered with that for the next 4 months. And unless you get Captain America's shield up in terms of we're just asking for this, they're going to continue to hammer you. So has anyone set down the rules for getting to the ask?
The rules in terms of internal to our caucus on the House side, and the Republicans, if they have, I haven't been part of those discussions. I'm not on the committees of jurisdiction, but I know that there's been vigorous discussion behind the scenes, both leading up to the Speaker vote and since Kevin McCarthy was elected Speaker. Obviously, they've been populating the committees. I know Jody is talking with his counterparts on the appropriations committees, the authorizing committees. I know this is a priority for Speaker McCarthy, and it's something we debated in our retreat many months ago. So I completely take your point about having a very simple, digestible headline that we can present to the American people. And right now, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get there, given the quality of people we have in key leadership positions.
Is there certainty on your part that the Republicans will not vote for defense cuts? And I, in fact, that will not vote for anything that is a real defense cut, which takes into account inflation. We just cannot do that. Is there confidence on your part that the caucus will stick together on that?
I am very confident that a budget resolution that cuts defense in real terms will not pass the House of Representatives. I mean, if you think about, let's say there's 20 votes for defense cuts based on just the number that were initially opposing Speaker McCarthy, there are far more votes against defense cuts in the House Republican caucus. So a budget resolution that attempted to do that, in my opinion, would be dead on arrival. And I can't imagine Mike Rogers on Armed Services, Mike Turner on House Intel, myself on the China Select Committee, Ken Calvert on Defense Appropriations, getting behind that in any way. Now, of course, we want to be responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollar. Of course, there are efficiencies to be found in the Defense Department. Of course, we can downsize the largest military service, which is DoD civilians, which has grown at an exponential rate. I'm all for that type of tooth-to-tail rebalancing and investing more money in hard power and less in useless bureaucracy, but we cannot cut defense at a time when our enemies are investing historic amounts in defense. So that will not happen in the U.S. House of Representatives.
If I can even hear that from a number of people, I will be happy. But can you see linking the debt limit rise to a guaranteed rate of rise in defense spending? Because, Congressman, you and I agree, the rest of the country doesn't. We're in 1938. People don't understand. We could have conflict in the South China Sea today, and it wouldn't surprise me. I'd be upset, and we're not in a good position. But does the Congress, and that's broadly speaking, understand that we're in 1938?
Not yet. That's going to be part of our mission on the Select Committee on China, is to wake people up and eventually ensure that we are not in an interwar period, but rather we take the steps necessary such that we are in 1979 and 1938, where it's dark right now, but morning in America is on the horizon, and we make the investments necessary to protect our sovereignty, our national security, and ultimately win this new Cold War with Communist China.
Chairman Mike Gallagher, thank you, Mr. Chairman. How'd the Packers do in round one? I wasn't watching.
They took a break.
They took a break. So did the Browns. We got a new defensive coordinator, Jim Schwartz. He's coming over to save us. Do you have any coaching changes in Milwaukee and Green Bay?
Hugh, it's a dark day in Green Bay, Wisconsin right now. We're trying to figure out if Aaron Rodgers is going to be our quarterback next year. We'll see.
Is he as old as Tom Brady?
I think he's my age. He's either 38 or maybe he's a year older. He's 39. He's a little bit younger.
Starting to break down. Got to go down to South America, find some hallucinogens.
I'm in my prime. I don't know. 38's my best year.
I think 38's fine for Congress. For the Green Bay Packers, not so sure. Chairman Gallagher, thank you. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. I think the segment I do with Chairman Gallagher each week is perhaps the most important radio I have ever done. And if people will just listen and pay attention, we are facing an existential threat, a real one in the Chinese Communist Party, and we have to prepare for it. Priority number one, 1938. We got to prepare for it. I'll be right back. Morning, Glory, America. Bonjour. Hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt from Studio West. Good Wednesday to you. I'm joined by Seung Min Kim. She's the AP reporter at the White House. Hello, Seung Min. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
I have not seen you in a long, long time, so I'm glad that you're on the Salem News Channel. Seung Min, before we get to your job at the White House, I got to ask you as an Iowa Hawkeye, what did you, and a veteran of the Des Moines Register, how did you react when the Democratic National Committee announced that they want to slit the throat of the Iowa caucuses? I mean, that's like an assault on everything Iowa, isn't it?
Right, it is. And the Iowa caucuses, especially if you're someone remotely interested in politics, is such an ingrained part of Iowa's personality, whether you're a Republican and a Democrat. And I know Iowans have been very proud of the role that they took in the nominating process. But I also think that you can't ignore the struggles, especially that the Democratic Party had in the last caucus in terms of the vote counting. Obviously, caucuses are just naturally harder to conduct than just going to a ballot location and casting your vote like you would in a primary. So, I've talked to some old friends and whatnot back in Iowa. I think they're disappointed, but I think they kind of get that it's time.
Yeah, the good news is the Republicans are still going there. So we'll still get the Iowa State Fair. We'll still get the crunching. Right. Every time Mike Pompeo goes to Iowa, he gets like 1,000 people to show up. He hadn't even declared yet. So it's really kind of it's a crazy political culture. When did you first get the political bug, Seung-min?
It was actually not until high school. I had a great high school government teacher in junior year, I believe, and he made me want to study political science in college. And then I just kind of went from there. And then, once you're a little bit older and you realize the role that Iowa has in the nominating process, the national role, I mean, even international role, you just kind of get to know how what an opportunity that is at such a young age. So that's
fabulous. I love high school teachers who do that. Do you want to give us his or her name?
It was Brady Shutt from Iowa City, or it's West High School in Iowa City. So yeah.
Bravo to Brady. Yeah. Now, Seung-min, you are now the AP's White House reporter. And I tell people you are the millennials' Helen Thomas, because Helen got that seat and she never gave it up. Do you have a front row chair? Does the AP get a first row or a second row chair?
It's first row and right smack dab in the center. So
you have the best seat in American politics.
Yeah, we're pretty, the 7 of us on the White House team are pretty darn lucky to have the role.
Yeah, that is the best seat. Now, I'm going to talk to you today and Olivia Beavers and then Peter Baker tomorrow, because I'm looking I don't watch the press conferences. I'm trying to figure out, has anybody asked Karine Jean-Pierre yet, or any of the White House people, what was the precipitating event for the search of the Penn Biden Center? Do you know?
We have definitely asked that during the briefings. I think since the revelation of these documents early last week, I think if you've listened to the press briefings with Karine, we've asked kind of every iteration or every sort of angle that we could ask. And that was definitely one of the first questions that we had. What prompted the president's then former vice president's lawyers to go to the Penn Biden Center? Were they just kind of doing a perfunctory clean out of his offices? Was there something suspicious that sort of prompted them to go look for these documents? They have been asked that, and we actually don't know the answer to that question. I think basically on any sort of specific question that you have for the White House on these documents, the handling of the documents, what prompted the search for them, and kind of all of these queries that we have, they have declined to comment. They referred to the Justice Department. They say they are respecting a process that respects the integrity of the Justice Department, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of questions, particularly as it relates to their transparency and how forthcoming they were with the public about these documents, particularly because they were discovered, in a very heated political time. It was less than a week before the midterms, and we're just finding about it now. So obviously that leaves us with a lot of questions and just trying to find out, what really happened here.
Seung-min, I'm also curious, has anybody asked my hypothesis based upon conversation with old White House council members is that the president received subpoena in connection to the grand jury that is sitting in connection with Hunter Biden, and that they asked for any documents related to Hunter Biden's work, and that therefore they were obliged, might be a subpoena Duke has taken, might be anything. Did anyone ask Karine yet if the president has received a grand jury subpoena for anything?
We have the variation of the question that we've asked. And I can tell you that if Karine does get asked that question, obviously she would refer to the special counsel's office, not saying that's a good answer or wrong answer. That's just the answer that she will give. The variation of the question that the White House press corps has asked is whether the president would be willing to sit down for an interview with the special counsel should it come to that case. They've declined to really answer that fully. I think they just defer to the fact that Richard Sauber in the White House counsel's office said the White House will be cooperating fully with the special counsel's investigation, assuming that if it comes to the president's testimony, that would be facilitated. But we would like a precise answer whether the president would be willing to sit down, and that's something that they specifically haven't said. I will note, however, that now Secretary of State Tony Blinken, who was had a leading role in the Penn Biden Center before the Biden administration. We know he's been a very long time close aide of the president. He said, first of all, he didn't know about these documents when he was working at the Penn Biden Center at the time. And he said, I would be willing to fully cooperate with the special counsel should it come to that. So at least at the State Department, they were clear.
There are two questions which I think Karine needs to answer. And I don't think you can refer these to the Department of Justice because they won't know, which is, has President Biden received a grand jury investigation, and has the president searched his McLean home? The Bidens own a home in McLean, or at least they lived in McLean for 4 years, in addition to their main mansion and their Rehoboth Beach house. There's a third house. Has the McLean house come up at all in the questioning, Seung-min?
The McLean house has not come up. And actually, it was a house, they didn't own that house. It was actually rented from this Washington area entrepreneur. Their residence in that ended, I believe, before. It has definitely it's definitely ended. They do not rent that property anymore. So I think there may be an assumption that once they moved out, everything may have been cleaned out. But no, that house has not come up in our.
That's what I thought might be the answer. So that everything was moved out. Did anything go to storage? Because the next question is where, because you can't move everything into the White House. You know that. I know that. They must have sent stuff either to Delaware or to Rehoboth Beach or to the mansion. These are factual questions, but the most important one is not, I think, whether you'll sit down with the special counsel. Trump didn't, Clinton did, but that whether or not he's received a subpoena. Seung-min, in terms of the special counsel, have they set up a press office that AP, this isn't your beat, so I don't expect you to know unless someone told you. Has the special counsel set up a Ken Starr-like operation or a Robert Mueller-like operation where they deal with the press via one lawyer?
That would be a question for my Justice Department colleagues. But I will say, just if past this prologue, we saw how little Robert Mueller's aides, his press person, told the media during that whole special counsel investigation. I think he became kind of notorious for this no comment stance to reporters when things would leak out about Mueller's probe throughout the first a couple of years of President Trump's time in office. So I would guess, knowing the professionals at the Justice Department, knowing kind of generally how these special counsel investigations work, that if and when Mr. Hur, taps someone to deal with the press with these kinds of stories, that person would be equally mum as his or her predecessor was in the Mueller probe.
Last question, Seung-min. Whenever a special counsel involves a president, almost inevitably every member of the White House lawyers up. Have you asked Karine if she's got a lawyer? Have you asked Ron Klain if he's got a lawyer? Because whenever there's a special counsel, everyone is in peril. Has anyone lawyered up to your knowledge?
That is that I can't remember off the top of my head. We know that there are aides in the Biden administration who already have been interviewed by investigators, whether they have had to retain extra counsel to deal with this particular type of inquiry, which is not your standard inquiry that people would generally need lawyers for. That I don't know, but we do know that Kathy Chung, she has a role at the Pentagon. She was a personal aide to President Biden, then former President Biden, who kind of was, I don't know if he was in charge, but involved in the packing up of documents at the final day.
Seung-min, that music, which you do not hear, tells us that we're out of time. So I want to thank you, though. It's wonderful for you to be up early. Congratulations on the AP center seat. Seung-min Kim from AP. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Congress is finally getting organized. Olivia Beavers with Politico has been covering the stand-up of the various committees. Most of the attention has been paid to the House Oversight Committee. But Olivia Beavers, I'm actually much more interested in the Select Committee on China and the Judiciary Subcommittee on Weaponization. Good morning, Olivia. How are you? I don't hear you, Olivia. Are you on mute or are we on mute?
Is this better?
Yep, that's it. There you are.
Oh, sorry, just figuring this out.
Yeah, that's okay. So, Olivia, I had Chairman Gallagher on just now, and
Yes.
he says the Democrats haven't named a ranking member for the China Committee. Have you got any gossip reporting or speculation that's informed by your walking the hallways on who the Democrats will name to pair up with Mike Gallagher?
Yes, we have some names. It's interesting. You're hearing from Democrats who are starting to push Asian American members for that role. So Andy Kim is a name that we're hearing being pushed, and he used to work at the State Department. We're hearing Raja Krishnamurthy from Illinois. He's a member on the House Intelligence Committee, and also, Ro Khanna's name has come up. He doesn't have as much of a background in national security, but he's someone whose name has still been floated. And then the other name that I'm hearing is Alyssa Slotkin, who is a CIA analyst. She's not an Asian American, but her name is still being raised. And some of the Democrats are pushing for them to at least be on the committee, even if they are not rankers. And the other name is Andre Carson, who might be a contender for leading the House Intelligence Committee as a ranking member. But if he doesn't, my understanding is he has some interest in the China Select Committee. So the names are starting to trickle out. And, I think that these would be members who would be pretty serious counterpoints, who would work with Gallagher pretty well. And
those are all very fine names.
Mhm.
Those are serious people.
Those are serious.
How about on the Republican side? What's your list look like on the Republican side?
The list is still growing. I think we're hearing, Dan Crenshaw's name. Jim Banks made his bid for the Senate, but I've been hearing his name before that. Congressman Andy Barr, Michelle Steele, Young Kim. So I think we're still waiting to hear who exactly that might be, and I think we're going to be getting that decision soon. But I know that there's been so much interest in this committee that I was basically, sources were telling me not to really expect to see members of the House Intelligence Committee, Republicans kind of cross over, or as much as, a current chairman sit on the committee, because enough members are kind of pushing McCarthy to be named on this panel.
Well, it's going to be a highly visible panel. I believe they're going to go out on the road and hold a bunch of hearings. You better start lobbying your bosses at Politico to get you a travel budget, Olivia, because whoever covers this wins. Let me talk to you about the House Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee on Weaponization.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm not really interested in oversight. Oversight got a bunch of the grenade hurlers, and it's going to be kind of a wild time for Jim Comer. And I'm not really going to be very invested in that committee, but I am invested in the Jim Jordan run subcommittee on weaponization. Do we know who is going to be on that with him?
So my understanding is that Jerry Nadler will be sort of Jim Jordan's counterpoint. He's also the ranker on the judiciary as a whole. So we're going to probably see a pretty fierce back and forth like we normally see on that committee, and they're going to be having their rounds. But, as for members, especially on the Republican side, I know that they do not have to be sitting on judiciary to be sort of named to this select committee, this house within the judiciary. So you could be seeing, Chris Stewart, you could be seeing Kelly Armstrong, you could be seeing them pulling different lawyers from different committees who once sat on the judiciary at one point or another and participating in this to help, get some of their strong questioners.
I kicked this around with Chip Roy last week. I want former AUSAs on this committee. The people who have prosecuted cases, like Chip Roy is a very accomplished former assistant United States attorney and Texas assistant attorney general. I want people who know how to ask questions. Now, Jim Jordan brings energy. He also brings focus, and he usually executes pretty well. But they'll screw this up if they have show ponies instead of workhorses. Is there recognition of that in the members that you talk to, Olivia?
I think there's always recognition that if you overplay your hand and you come off as too much of trying to make a viral clip, you're not going to be as effective. But I think that there's a certain element to that also is how you capture attention, and it's walking that fine line. I know that Chip Roy is interested in that committee. I know Dan Bishop, and you're going to see some of the sort of Freedom Caucus members who are at the center of everything earlier this month who might be also considered. And I think that if they thread that needle, they'll still have like a very strong committee. Those are pretty serious members. It's if they start wading in and having people who are pushing more conspiracy rather than what's grounded in truth, that they might get in trouble.
Yeah, again, I do not want unserious people representing the Republicans. Democrats can throw on their grenade throwers if they want, but I think that committee could be very important, like the Gallagher committee. Olivia Beavers at Politico, Olivia_Beavers. Follow her on Twitter. Read her stuff at Politico. Thank you for joining me, Olivia. I'm coming back next. Good morning, Glory America, Bonjour, Hi Canada. Two stories, GarageGate and the debt limit. And no one better to talk about with them than the National Review's Jim Geraghty, who you also read in the Washington Post. And he and I agree too much stuff is classified. But good morning, Jim. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh.
I don't see you. Am I supposed to see you?
I'm waving at you. Can you hear me? Can you
Yeah.
hear the sound
Eventually
of me
we'll
waving?
see you.
Okay.
No, I don't see you, but eventually I will. Geraghty, the indispensable. Let's start with, there you are. There you are. Let's begin, if we can, with, I know it's always better to see people. Begin with your column in the Washington Post on overclassification. It is a problem, but we don't know if that's a problem that is applicable either to Trump or to Biden because we don't know what's in the documents. Correct summary?
Yeah. Look, I saw somebody making the observation about this, that, hey, we've had these arguments about overclassification for a long, long time. Going back to the 9/11 Commission, they said that one of the reasons information was not being shared the way it should is because all of the incentives in government are to overclassify things and to keep things classified. There's no risk to keeping it classified forever, but there is a risk to ever letting it out. And thus all of the incentives are on one side. And you can go back, you can find all kinds of experts, people who've left government service, people who've been in the intelligence community. Barack Obama, complained about this back during the Hillary Clinton things. Well, there's classified and then there's classified. Is some of that, excuse making for Hillary? Sure. But the fact that enough people have said this, I don't have a security clearance. I don't think you have a security clearance.
Not anymore.
9.7% of Americans don't have security. So we don't know, but we have a sneaking suspicion that enough people have made this complaint. So if we have an overclassification problem, we have that regardless of what you think of Donald Trump. And we have that regardless of what you think of Joe Biden. But now we can't have that conversation because anybody who says this, well, you're just trying to make excuses for the guy you like, even though I don't particularly like either one of these guys.
So I thought it was a well-timed column. Now, I do want to say I held the nation's highest clearances from 1984 to 1989. Top secret and sensitive compartment of information, but not all of them, because there are like 20 slices of SCI, and I had the ones that were necessary for domestic terrorism. My question, Jim, it's not a question, it's observation. One document can sink a ship. If you've got a list of our spies in China, that's a bad thing to have at your house, because then they'll go and kill all those people. You can also have 10,000 documents like the Pentagon Papers that don't matter at all when they come out. So what do you think the Biden papers are based on smell, since nobody who's actually seen them is talking?
Well, the first thought is this something that would come up in Biden's wanting to write a memoir or something like that? Something that would be an account of a meeting or his discussions with the president, something very sensitive or something like that. Say a meeting where Biden had said, Barack, whatever you do, don't do that Bin Laden raid. It's going to go terribly. We don't even know who's in that. The other question is it something in there that's a little embarrassing? I still to this day believe that Sandy Berger was stuffing documents in his socks and destroying documents because there was something in there that was really embarrassing, either to him personally or to Bill Clinton. Something like, Bin Laden's never going to result in anything. Trust me, I got terrorism and Al Qaeda under control.
Yeah.
That was what would motivate you to do something, as extreme as, stuffing them in your socks and trying to destroy them. So my guess is one of two things. Either it's something that Biden thought was really important, he wanted to have writing memoir-wise, or there's something in that's kind of embarrassing. Say, hey, this is our assessment of Burisma. Here's all the shady characters there, Mr. Vice President. Hey, do you know who your son's working with? That kind of stuff.
That's it. That's what I think. Memos warning him about his son would be the kind that he just would walk back to Delaware. That's what. Now, I asked Seung Kim yesterday, one of the very fine reporters in the White House, has anyone asked the direct question, did the president receive a subpoena from the Hunter Biden grand jury or any subpoena from any grand jury? That has not been asked. There's got to be a precipitating event here, Jim. The lawyers just don't show up at Penn Biden and start taking. Lawyers cost a lot of money. I want to know what the precipitating event is.
by sneaking suspicion, Hugh, I can't prove this, but everybody I mentioned this to kind of nods and says, yeah, that makes sense. Look, Joe Biden goes on 60 Minutes and says, finding the documents at Mar-a-Lago, terribly irresponsible. Who could possibly be so irresponsible? And I can't help but wonder if somebody in the Biden inner circle went, are we sure we didn't do that? Are we sure we didn't accidentally walk out with some documents and all that? Are we sure we're purer than Caesar's wife in this area? And let's go through and check, because there's never been. It's not like they're removing the files. It's not like they're doing inventory. Like, why were people looking through it when they'd end up discovering this kind of stuff? So that's
the question. Now, the second question is, they lived in McLean from 2017 to 2021. They had a house in McLean. Seung confirmed for me that they no longer have that. It was a rental. So the question becomes, when they moved, you know what it's like to move? And I've moved a few times in the last few years. A bunch of stuff gets put in a room or a storage unit, and you don't know that it's there. Have you heard anyone ask, did the McLean house contents go anywhere other than the White House, the Delaware house, and the Rehoboth house? Rehoboth is in Delaware, but the Wilmington house and the Rehoboth house. Has anybody asked that?
No, and let me point out, asking Karine Jean-Pierre may not be terribly useful, because she will say, I have not been briefed on that. I will refer you to the White House counsel, who's not answering any questions, or I will refer you to the Department of Justice, which isn't answering any questions, which is another way of saying, I'm not going to answer that question. So, Hugh, you're coming up with really good questions to ask here. Whether anybody's actually going to answer that, or whether there'll be any consequences for not answering that, remain to be seen.
Okay, one more try at the end. The Wall Street Journal headline today: Justice Department considered but rejected role in Biden document search. This is the single exhibit Republicans need to say, this is why Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden got treated differently than Donald Trump. Donald Trump got a raid at Mar-a-Lago, and they're going to say obstructing justice, etc. Hillary got to review her own file. Her lawyers deleted half of her emails, and Joe Biden's houses weren't searched by the FBI. Does that have traction with anyone not named Geraghty, Hewitt, or living inside the Beltway?
The average Republican will say, yes, of course. This is ipso facto evidence that there's a double standard. Some might say, aha, the deep state protects its own, stuff like that. I don't know if the average American will buy into it that much. I don't know how much the average American pays attention to a story like this in the first place. And look, there was clear that there were efforts to get stuff back from Trump, and Trump kept saying either they had it or they turned over everything. So the restitution for what I would call an execution of a search warrant, not a raid, Hugh.
It's a raid. We've had that FBI, DOJ. They call it a raid everywhere else.
When you say the word raid, I think that's, But
that is the
case. And the FBI saying, the Biden guys, I'm sure they've got it all. That's fine. That does look bad. The fact is, the fact that right now the FBI hasn't said, you know what, we're going to send our own people who have a security clearance just to make sure you guys didn't miss anything. Because
what were they thinking?
What's that?
Jim, what were they thinking? There is no upside to not demanding the FBI come with you.
Because my guess is, look, when Biden gets asked about this or really any other topic, his response is always some sort of version of, you're being unbelievably ridiculous with this young. It was in a garage next to my Corvette. You know how much I like that Corvette? The idea, the garage was locked. Now, of course, that doesn't qualify. The presence of the Secret Service in Mar-a-Lago didn't make it a secure site any more than the presence of the Secret Service at Biden's house would make it a secure site. But Biden, my guess is very, very, defensive when somebody accuses him of something. And my guess is people within the Department of Justice were like, we don't want to pick that fight right now.
People inside the Department of Justice. Second question, Jim. Who did the special counsel make the decision to stand down the FBI, or did Christopher Wray, or did Merrick Garland? This is an important question. Who decided not to send the FBI? Do we know?
No, we don't know, and I think it makes a big difference. If it's whoever, the lower it is on the totem pole, the less harmful it is. The higher it goes on the thing. Look, the idea that anybody up with the chain had said, no, you're not sending you're not sending the FBI agents. That looks bad, and we'll see.
Well, once they've appointed a special counsel, he has the con. It's up to him. It's not up to Merrick Garland. And so if he didn't make the decision, there's politicization of this investigation.
And look, the idea of, look, if we send FBI agents And because I'll use your preferred term, Hugh, raid. FBI raid on Biden house is going to be a giant screaming headline. Also, remember, much of this is occurring right before the midterm elections, at least in the Penn Center site. FBI raids Biden offices, and of course, that'd be a huge story. I went back and I went through most of the close races. Republicans won, at least the House races in 2022. But you could still find maybe a handful where 800.
30 seconds, Jim.
1,300 votes there. This could have been a factor in the midterm. It's not a huge factor, but one bad news cycle right before Election Day might have hurt Democrats, which gives them.
It sure hurt George W. Bush in 2000. One DUI in 2000 led to Florida, which led to, it led to a lot of bad stuff. Jim Geraghty from National Review and the Washington Post. Thank you, James. Follow him on Twitter at Jim Geraghty. Sorry about your Jets. Not really. I'll be right back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in